The answer, it has been said, lies in the soil, but we are steadily degrading that soil, the very natural capital we rely on for our food. It's a similar story with ocean ecosystems. How can we farm in a different way, and what would a regenerative model look like for our soils and seas? These are some of the issues we'll be discussing in the next 45 minutes, so stay tuned.
Oh, I'm back on.
Hello and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival 2016. The DIF is an open access event for entrepreneurs, makers, learners, educators and doers from all over the world. This is the last Tuesday of the DIF and we've had almost 200 sessions, all now available through our website on Catch Up, and there are around 100 more to go, so stay tuned and make sure to explore all the DIF has to offer. Please get involved in this session through commenting under the video or via Twitter. We have hashtag ThinkDiff or @ThinkDiff_ and get in touch. So, we know we are eroding our topsoil and that industrial agriculture methods lie at the heart of the problem. At the same time, we have practices such as overfishing reducing our capacity to harvest seafood. We need to reimagine the food system, and today we'll try to do this through the lens of regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture is about harvesting the biological materials and resources of a particular area for people, yet at the same time regenerating the natural capital of the area, such as the soil and the ocean. My name's Vicky, and here today in the studio we have my colleague Craig from our education team, an ecologist by training and with a very keen interest in regenerative agriculture. We have Bren Smith joining us remotely from the US. Bren is a pioneering 3D ocean farmer, and we'll be speaking to Bren a bit later about how regenerative farming might look in our oceans. We also have Tim May from Kingsclere Estate, a 1,000 hectare family-run farm based not far from here in Hampshire, and we'll be talking to him about how he practices regenerative agriculture. So, we have a quick video from Tim. I think it would be great if you could introduce and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure, Vicky. What we've got here is a great film looking at how we've started to regenerate the soil on our farm. And we've been doing it over the last 3 or 4 years, and this is a film we took this year, so sort of 3 years into our new programme. I suppose we look at it now and then we can go from there.
Down for 3 years. But might there have been an improvement already? There's only one person to ask, Mike Carrington. And guess what? He needs another hole.
Go on, Mike, let's see what we've got.
It's big to the last one you dug up.
I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow, what have we got down here then, Mike?
Well, the very first thing is this dark area here, which is growing and developing. Before, you probably just had an area of rooting in this top couple of inches. You had a very tight soils, a bit like concrete.
Yeah.
You know, now we're down to here, and even down to here. Look, this has changed dramatically. You can see roots now almost. What do we talk about? A good metre and a half.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
And into this,
Yeah.
it's actually quite heavy clay. Most of these root systems will have probably followed wormholes. The worm leaves a much higher level of nutrition behind it, so roots are naturally going to utilise that easy method of moving down.
And we're getting these earthworms coming all the way down here and the roots coming all the way down here, and it looks really positive.
So if we take roughly half the energy that these plants produce is exuded out of its root system. And with the mob grazing type principle, you're pushing back in organic material, which then is a food source again for microbes. And we've actually started feeding the soil. We've got a much better connection all the way through the profile, even into these deeper subsoils. And so we can get more out of this soil than you could when you had your old intensive system. Biology is really what it's all about. We farm with chemicals.
Great, and so really interesting video there. And what sort of time frame and what sort of changes did you make to the farm to see these sorts of changes to the soil?
So that's about 4 years into our change. And what we did, we were a conventional farm growing just cereals. And I went on an international study tour and came back and realised we needed to change the way we were farming for the long-term security of the business. And I brought grass back into our rotation. So by bringing grass back in, we were putting in a perennial crop that was going to be on the same bit of ground for 4 years without us disturbing the ground, and that was going to be sending its roots out and exploiting the minerals in the ground and getting that all cycling again. And that was, it sounds quite simple to plant a bit of grass, but it was quite a revolutionary sort of thing to do in a all arable sort of context, an all cropping context. Generally, the way things are going is the other way, that farmers are coming out of grass and growing crops and monocrops. And
why is it so out of the ordinary that people to reintroduce grass in? And
a couple of reasons. Generally, it's people would say it's less economic, and it's much more complex to manage as well. So the economic model has been to get bigger and bigger and more simple in the way of farming. And we've sort of started to see, well, you can do too much of that, and by actually stopping and adding a bit of complexity into the system, a bit more diversity, we think we're going to build our natural resource, which is the soil, a lot better, which will give us much more resilience in the long term.
And what prompted this change in direction for you?
So I did a scholarship program, which is an international program, and which was about in 2013, and it gave me a lot of time to look at where our business was going and where we were going sort of as an industry, I suppose. And what I saw was that we were in the situation where we had sort of relatively flat yield, so we weren't improving what we were growing per acre each year, and we had an ever increasing cost of that production, and that set alongside inflation kind of meant that our business was going downhill. We were kind of flatlining, but inflation meant that we were actually going downhill. So we had to find a way of improving our productivity out of our ground into the long term that could continue to give us growth going forward. And there was no way within farming in that context that we could do that.
And so we obviously saw in the film that you've seen some success with the soil, but have you seen success with the approach in these last few years so far?
We're seeing success in a few places. We're seeing success in the amount of wildlife we're hosting on the farm, which is great, but that's not economic. I need to have economic resilience in my own business first. And what we're seeing is that we can be much more opportunistic with what's going on the farm, and by having livestock in the system, we can come in and whereas before there used to be a waste, all of a sudden that becomes food for an animal. So we're just starting to tap into loads of different streams of food and production that we didn't really see before. So it's really opening our eyes to how we can, drive our business and find more from within the same setting, within that area of land. We can get more from it without really working really hard, using the animals to do the work for us.
Okay, really interesting. And I know that Craig visited the farm and came back with a few ideas around the chicken farm that you set up. It would be great to hear more about that as well.
Yeah, certainly. So what the context of how we're doing the grazing is that we're going to move the animals around the grass platform. Every day we'll move them somewhere new. And that's to try and mimic animals in the prairies out in America. And the idea is that they'll go off and find the best grass, and then they'll leave their dung behind, and that forms a really good source of protein for something for chickens in the background. So in the prairies you'd have birds coming in, flocking in, hitting all the muck that was left from the buffalo. And the reason they'd do that is because the muck would be full of beetles and worms and that sort of stuff, trying to digest that muck and bring that into the food system. But all those beetles are a fantastic source of protein for birds particularly. So if we're trying to mimic that by bringing in a chicken flock that will come along, scratch away, get all those bugs and beetles and consume them and use that as a source of protein, and then turn that into eggs for us to sell. And what's really nice about that model is that because this system doesn't need a set bit of ground, we don't need to charge any rent. So then that becomes a really good way of letting a new entrant into agriculture, because it's really flexible and they're not tying up sort of valuable land, because they're just being very opportunistic and how they fit into the system. So that's what's really exciting for us, is we're trying to find more examples of where there's just little niches and a little bit of waste that we can capitalise on, really.
And are there other examples that you've got of this going on the farm?
Yeah, so at the moment I've got some pigs running at the moment that are running behind a herd of cows, and the cows are grazing turnips, but because the cows are quite big, they're trampling some of the turnips in. And pigs love to root around, so the pigs are now starting to follow the cows along and get the turnips. So those turnips would have been waste, they would have gone into the system and rotted, but all of a sudden we've got some pigs going around just finding that waste product. And the quality of the food after this, because they get their minerals and everything else sort of from a natural environment, and it's really exciting.
I certainly remember again on that video, I think you were saying, Tim, some of those turnips are so huge. I mean, the fertility, I mean, do you get that sense, like in that film there, that the nutrient quality is improving and the yields are there? It's almost like as you regenerate the soil, there's more potential, isn't there, for the biological productivity, and this idea then you can bring in these other enterprises and this enterprise stacking, isn't it? There's more potential, do you feel?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really exciting story, but it's quite a long-term story. So we're probably 3 or 4 years in, and the guys, the pioneers that are doing this sort of stacking all this stuff together, they're 10, 20 years into the system, and they're really seeing that fertility coming into the system. We're still in the early days where we're learning how to use it and we're learning how to build that. So we're not getting that amazing sort of burst of fertility on the farm yet. That's the idea that I've sort of brought into. But we're still working on towards that. So we're still using a lot of nitrogen fertiliser and that sort of stuff. Right. But in the longer term, we'll shift. That's right. Yeah.
And I mean, among the farming community, have you come across scepticism or disbelief, or you moving away from some of the more entrenched ideas that you were working with before?
Yeah, certainly. The farmers are a bit more resistant to what we're doing, but the local community and people not involved in farming really get what we're trying to do. So they're not really, they've got much more open minds, the non-farmers. And generally the farmers are a bit resistant because it's what we were all doing. So back in the 50s, there was livestock all over, in our part of the world, there's livestock everywhere, and mixed farming, all this sort of stuff was all going on. And they've all had to come out of it because of economics and basically it just hasn't worked for them. So when they see someone saying, oh, actually we're going back into all that stuff, it raises the heckles quite a bit. It's quite interesting. But they all think we should. They all think they should be doing it, and they all say good luck to you, Tim. But how's it going to work?
Making that move.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Good luck to you, Tim. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Watching you.
The model looks interesting.
Yeah, and so where do you see your farm in sort of 10 years' time, or when you retire, or if you pass it on to your children?
So we're playing with our models of employment. We're playing with how we structure the whole business, and I've got a little saying of more partners, less employees. So I wanted to have a whole group of people that we're working as a group trying to get somewhere, instead of the very linear sort of employee-employer relationship, which doesn't really work for me very much. We should have a lot more stuff going on, a lot more wildlife, and hopefully that wildlife will come as a side shoot of actually farming the way we're farming, not livestock over there and farming over there and wildlife over there. They should be much more integrated and needing each other. Whereas at the moment, they're kind of, well, you do a little bit of environmental stuff on the edge of your field, and then you farm the rest. And it doesn't really work. So that should be much more integrated as we go forward, which would make it really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Really interesting, and I'm sure we'll pick up on that point later in the session. I am just going to introduce Karen, who is our co-host for this session, and she's going to tell us about some of the really awesome sessions coming up at the DIF and things that you should check out.
Thank you, Vicky. So if you're very interested in the soils topic, agriculture and farming, then I recommend you to check what Nikki Silvestri was saying about soils during the DIF Live launch. This session is already available in catch-up, so make sure to check this one. And coming next after this session, we will have Ludmila talking about industrial symbiosis, and she's actually going to explore the human side of the development of this industrial symbiosis. Ludmila is actually one of the Schmidt MacArthur Fellows this year. And tomorrow, I recommend you to catch up. This session is the famous Douglas Rushkoff in the rise of digital technology. If you really want to know his insights about how technology is impacting our daily lives, our culture, our economy, then don't miss out this session. And remember that this Friday, the DIF will be over, and you can watch until Friday any of the 300 sessions that we have available. But after Friday, if you really want to watch any of those, then I recommend you to get yourself a My DIF account. Besides watching the sessions, you can still comment. You can save your favorite sessions based on the topics you want. You can actually search for keywords like soils, agriculture, farming, to make a selection based on the topics that you want. This is all I got for today. Back to you, Becky.
Thank you so much, Karen. Some great stuff coming up, which you should all check out. We also will probably just kick off a conversation, reintroduce Bren back into the conversation, and kick that off with a video if we can.
So the farm, all it is, imagine a sort of simple scaffolding system underwater where you have hurricane-proof anchors on the edges, and then just about 8 feet below the surface you have a horizontal rope. And so we'll have our kelp growing vertically down on the lines next to scallops and lantern nets, next to mussels and mussel socks, and then below the surface we have our oysters in cages and clams down in the mud. Scientists call it IMTA, Integrated Multitropic Aquaculture. The worst name I think anybody could have ever come up with. It's alienating from the start. And so we're trying to create this whole new dialect around ocean farming. We decided on 3D ocean farming because it's an idea, I think, that captures people's imagination. They don't know what it is at first, but it gets them to lean forward.
Hi, Bren, do we have you on the line? Can we hear you, Bren?
Oh, sorry.
Great.
I'm muted. I'm here.
Cool. So we've actually heard that Bren has done a 7 hours on the boat already this morning. So any muting issues, I think we can absolutely forgive. How are you doing? How are you doing this morning? This morning with you, this afternoon with us. Good.
It's doing good. It's an honor to be here. Thanks so much. I can't see everybody, so it's a little. It's very lonely on this end.
So we've seen quite a lot of what's been, what the farm looks like from the surface, but it would be great to understand a little bit more about what's going on under the surface too.
Yeah, and I couldn't hear the videos, so excuse me for repeating some of this stuff, but it's really an underwater garden, and I heard a bit where we have hurricane-proof anchors, horizontal lines across the surface. basically a scaffolding system. One of the ideas we developed was, why build structures in the ocean when you don't have to fight gravity? So just a simple scaffolding system. We have it down to about $5,000 to create a 5-acre farm. Incredibly cheap. We call it the nail salon model of the sea, which gives all sorts of people from all walks of life access to this new form of farming. But the idea is really to grow as many restorative species in a 10 or 20 acre plot. So we grow kelp vertically downwards. We have scallops, mussels next to that, and they rotate year to year. And then we have oysters and then clams down in the mud. And if you were to take a network of our gardens totaling the size of Washington State, you could technically feed the world. We have extremely small footprints, but really densely packed. 10 to 25 tons of seaweed per acre, 250,000 shellfish. And probably the most important thing for those of us have the bad hangover of aquaculture of the last 30 years is that we have a really low aesthetic impact and are protecting and reviving the commons. So anybody can boat and swim and fish over my farm. When you come, I do tours, and there's really nothing to see because it's all underwater. I always say it's the biggest ripoff in ecotourism in the country. But that low aesthetic impact's really important as we move into our oceans, which are these commons.
Really, really interesting. And so how much revenue can you get from 5 acres? And that's actually a question that's come in from Dave from Bristol.
Yeah. So one of the challenges we've had is really looking at the entire value chain and decide where can profits be pulled out and where they shouldn't be. So 91% of U.S. farmers last year lost money. It's not a viable economy. So we're trying to figure out, how do we build a new economy where farmers actually succeed? You can net about $130,000 on 5 acres. That's after labor costs, after overhead. Again, the key to this economically is that it's so cheap because it's a zero input farm. We don't fertilize, we don't feed, we don't use water, which makes it first the most sustainable form of food production on the planet, but also the most economically viable form of food production on the planet. And as we face climate change and water prices go up, feed, fertilizer prices go up, our food is going to be the most affordable food in the planet. The economy is going to drive us this way. It depends if it's going to be disgusting food like being force-fed cod liver oil or whether it's going to be delicious. But we figured out the economics of it, and it's just, we don't have to fight gravity, and this is cheap stuff to build.
I think what's so exciting about that, isn't it? It's almost like, it sounds like these income streams. It's being very, there's that diversity, isn't it? I think you've talked in the past about the sort of the range of sort of options you've got with kelp, but it's all these other, your oysters and things. I presume it's this thing of the spreading the value chain across the biological materials.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, there are 10,000 edible plants in the ocean, a couple hundred kinds of shellfish. Like, we've barely broken the surface. We do kelp because it's really economically viable. We know how to grow it. We know how to do it in hatcheries. But this is the beginning of an entire new cuisine, what I think of as a climate cuisine of zero input food, where farmers all around the world are growing native species. We're so obsessed with fish in the ocean and obsessed with wild fish. And this is our chance to really break out of that, move bivalves and ocean plants to the center and wild fish to the edges. So the wild fish will be a treat maybe once a month, but we really center the diet around a plant-based diet.
And so how is regenerative agriculture in play in your vertical 3D farms?
Yeah, so it's all about species selection. What aquaculture did was pick the species that people want to eat. And those happen to be some of the most high input species, the salmons, the tunas, things that require a lot of infrastructure. Instead, we asked the oceans, okay, what can you provide? And we'll figure out how to grow those. So not only is it zero input food, but all of our crops are mitigation tools. I always say Mother Nature created 2 technologies designed to mitigate our harm. So kelp soaks up 5 times more carbon than land-based plants. It's called the sequoia of the sea. Our oysters are these amazing agents of activity, of sustainability. They filter 50 gallons of water a day, pulling nitrogen out of our waterways, and over-nitrification is the root cause of dead zones. And then our farms offer structures. Coral reefs are destroyed, and on my coast it was oyster reefs that were the basis for the foundation of the ecosystem. Our farms function as reefs, so there are hundreds of species that come hide, eat, and thrive on our farms. I mean, my farm used to be a barren patch of ocean, and now it's this thriving ecosystem. So in all these different ways, we're able to move into this space beyond sustainability and into restoration. And it's a lot of the ocean community is really kind of obsessed with ocean conservation, and I think ocean conservation is absolutely essential. But it's a Teddy Roosevelt, it's a Republican here in the U.S., a sort of Republican type of environmentalism. You could set aside the entire oceans as a conservation zone, and they're going to die unless you have engines of restoration that address climate change, that function as reef systems to rebuild our oceans. You're actually not an environmentalist anymore. I think the ocean sector hasn't confronted. They believe climate change is real. They just haven't confronted the real the implications of it and the opportunities in some ways.
It's really, really interesting, and we've actually had a bit of interest come in from Twitter, just asking about how big is the industry for kelp, and how do we convince people to eat it? Yeah, so listen, what I grow, especially the kelp, is absolutely disgusting. I would never eat it. Yeah, I eat at McDonald's most nights because I'm a fisherman. But it's not a delicious food. The existing market is anywhere from $6 to $10 billion dollars. But in a way, I don't care about the market. What I care about is changing the seafood plate, and then figuring out what can I grow as a farmer that's economically viable, that's restorative, and then this great movement of chefs we have nationally, globally, that are really trying to figure out how to make disgusting, environmentally sustainable food delicious. So I've teamed up with chefs, and one of the dishes we do, and the goal is really to make kelp the new kale, to desushify it. And so we do barbecue kelp noodles with parsnips and breadcrumbs. It sells out every night. And as soon as you begin seeing seaweeds not as seafood, just wrapping around some fish or seaweed salad, but think of it as a vegetable, those spice mixes and that sort of way of cooking really changes it, and I think moves it into a much more delicious place. But then at the same time, what we're learning is that merroir, just like terroir on land, we have a merroir on every one of our farms. So the seaweeds I grow have a really mild flavor. They stay al dente. They turn bright green. They go from brown to bright green when you cook them. And what's shocking to people is that it doesn't taste like seaweed. I had Rene Renzepi out on the farm this summer, David Chang. My wife cooked the kelp noodles for them, and they came back for thirds. It was one of the most frightening days of her life, but it worked. So I think this is possible as long as chefs are able to play their role. And if they can't make this delicious, they should quit their jobs. This is their role, and this is why they're on Earth. I've actually tried seaweed noodles, and they were pretty good, and I was the chef, so I've only got myself to blame if there was anything slightly strange about them. Yeah. It would be great to understand as well sort of how running your business has affected how you view the ocean. Yeah, I mean, I dropped out of high school when I was 14. Maybe the video said that. And, I'm a hunter-gatherer. That's what I'm in my heart. The climate change is driving us all into new professions. There is a major transition going on. I think I've turned into sort of a boring arugula farmer, which has really been hard on my ego. I can't hang out those same bars anymore and tell fishing stories.
But this move, at the same time, I still have the sense of meaning that comes with helping feed my country. So I'm losing some things, and the extractive economy just has to end. Chasing fish around the world, growing soy all over the world. We have no choice. Climate change is forcing us in that direction. I think the kinds of jobs we create, the kinds of meaning we create for fishermen like me is really important in this transition.
Really, really great stuff. And just to let everyone know, we do have a 15-minute video from Bren on the DIF website at the moment, so you can catch up on, delve a little bit deeper into some of the issues that he's raised here today. So we're trying to reimagine the food system through the lens of regenerative agriculture. And Tim, how do you react to Bren's story around sort of 3D fishing? And do you see any similarities with anything that he's spoken about in what you're doing on your farm?
Yeah, completely. So similar. Yeah, and what we're trying to do is find as many opportunities from nature and follow nature's lead. Let animals be animals, let pigs be pigs, let chickens be chickens, let cows be cows, and let them do their thing, and we'll take a little bit of cream off that function. And it sounds exactly the same as what Bren's doing. And there's so many similarities, and then also trying to find these opportunities that are cheap for people to come into, for new people to come in and get excited about, and that's been one of the biggest burdens barriers that new entrants have found in land-based farming, has been the amount of capital, the amount of upfront money, rent and risk that they've got to sign up to before they can get involved. And actually, we're trying to find systems that don't require that. That they can be opportunistic and they can start small and grow, and that's really, I think, we're both going the same way, I think.
Great.
I think another thing I liked was you were saying there, Bren, the idea of not a very fertile, productive area, and it's now very productive. It's almost like when you talk about this 3D, to me it's like this idea of the kelp there coming in like the forest. It's the green and the photosynthesis, and it's got starts developing that system. And so it's a bit like Tim as well. It's moving from the sort of the 2D above soil then, and he's thinking sort of 3D again with the root systems going deep down, and it's almost rethinking, isn't it, how we look at the whole system, whether it's a sort of a terrestrial one or a marine one. But we've missed that in the past, haven't we? We've been 2D, like you're saying, just scavenging for fish. Now it's this, you're seeing the opportunities in 3 dimension, I suppose.
I mean, what Tim's doing is absolutely fascinating. It's so fun to see those of us just experimenting at the edges and the synthesis starting to come together. I mean, we really believe in overproduction and under harvesting, and that's how we rebuild the ecosystems. The other piece is too often our thinking completely stops at the water's edge. It is a one food system, whether it's fertilizers coming in and causing dead zones in the ocean, or the opportunities of taking zero input foods, crops, and using them to feed them to our proteins and our vegetables on land, especially again as water and fertilizer prices go up. So for example, we have a program with Yale University to use all our kelp to grow on their farms to grow vegetables, and we can begin closing that nitrogen loop between land and sea. And then there's some recent studies out that if you feed kelp to cattle, you get a massive reduction in methane. So I think we've barely broken the surface. And why can't we have farmers working on land and sea at the same time? What's interesting, I'm having a flood of land-based farmers, young people come wanting to start farms. We have requests to start farms in every coastal state in North America and 20 countries around the world. And a significant part of those are folks that cannot afford things on land. So can we do shipping container mushroom growing in one season and then shift to kelp, which is just a winter crop? And let's really build these new professions that break down those barriers.
Really interesting. And we've got a time for a quick question from someone called Jenny, who says, let me just get it up here. So what are the main physical, logistical and regulatory issues related to locating your 3D ocean farm?
So We've had a lot of success where aquaculture hasn't. Again, our job is to learn all the mistakes made from industrial aquaculture, learn all the mistakes made from industrial agriculture, and kind of do food right this time. We have a clean slate. We can build a system from the bottom up, and we can build it the right way. That's what's exciting. On the regulatory front, one is pollution. And so we farm both in waters that are pristine, tested every week, and we do pollution farming, where we set up farms just to capture heavy metals, nitrogen, carbon, and that isn't used for food, it's used for biofuel. We work with the Department of Energy. There's a new biofuel program around kelp. And then because anybody can boat and swim and fish, the acceptance, the stakeholders around our oceans, we haven't faced those barriers. Now, eventually, I think we could face, if we could just face real challenges. But so far, we've had a lot of luck and a lot of support.
And so we've got another question actually that's come in from our audience, and this one's for Tim. So on the one hand, we are told that cows are a major contributor to greenhouse emissions through methane production. They've put, one cow per year, 1,000 litres of petrol. On the other, we are told that holistic livestock management can contribute to sequestering carbon in the soil. Is livestock rearing a good or bad thing for climate change?
It really depends how. That's such a very narrow question, and I think that's the whole discussion about about farming in general and its impact, and most things on their impact on the climate is it's all in detail. It's such a complex question. So how do you manage that cow on the land? How do you feed it? Are you feeding it corn that's taken 10 calories of oil to produce 1 calorie of grain, or are you feeding it grass that has taken has kind of grown in the system and nothing else can happen? You're kind of cycling it. Are you using some of Bren's kelp to feed the animal? There's so many variables in that question. So, and that's why there is those two viewpoints. So, that's the answer. It depends how.
I mean, that's an answer that no one can argue with, really. And a question from Bren actually that's come in, and it's, what would be your top tips to someone living by the sea who wanted to start a 3D ocean farm?
So it's a good question. I think first, it's really important to get stakeholder support. Your local environmental organizations, get schools, government officials, and create that small movement in your town to support and to learn and do the journey with you. I'm now just beginning to start underwater community gardens. So I could see as if there are challenges in the regulatory front, if people are not supportive at this point, take 1 acre offshore and just 5 minutes from the shore, create an underwater community garden, grow food, have other people in the community grow food, and then expand it and create a few commercial activities. The other thing is, do not scale for. I don't see growing in the ocean scale being 1,000-acre farms. There's all sorts of growing reasons. It's hard to grow in the oceans, and you want to diversify risk and grow in many places with small plots, and then have an average yield over time. But there's a huge amount of investment coming in now to the oceans because they see it as a blank space. They see us getting pushed off land. They think there's real money to be made. I approach it as a farmer, low barrier to entry, low overhead, start slow, and build a movement around it in your town.
Something that we could start potentially on the Isle of Wight. And Tim, you mentioned flat yields and increasing costs. Is it too early to tell if this equation is changing? Have yields increased and have costs decreased? Yeah,
it is too early to tell. It's the idea is that we're going to have 4 years of grass and then 4 years of crops, and we're about 3 years in, so we haven't gone through our 4 years of grass phase to know that what's happening on the crops. But the grass in itself, from year 1 to year 3, the way that's producing has dramatically changed. That's, the yield increases coming in the actual grass, but how that's going to affect if we go back into the monocropping and using that sort of built-up fertility that we've made in the grass in our monocrop that's going to be the test, but we don't know the answer yet. So it's probably going to be 8 years from start to finish till we have that answer.
One question I did want to ask Bren, really, I suppose, maybe it's just from our education team's point of view. As you say, you've got young entrepreneurs wanting to start up, and I like this thing again, it's at small scale, start small. But in terms of training and education and support, I mean, you know, like in the old days, maybe sort of a monoculture type sort of business. That's maybe in some ways quite simple, inputs, outputs. But those are complex systems you're managing. Tim likewise now he's managing that soil as well as his crops. What can you do to help in terms of the training side of people coming in?
So we have a hybrid system. I've got a non-profit, which is called Green Wave, and I've got a for-profit, which is all called Sea Green Farms. And the interaction of these two, I think, are really important. So our training, our policy, and our R&D happened under the nonprofit. What we do with farmers, they get a small grant, they get free seed, they get access, they get 2 years of consulting support, help with permitting, and then we agree, the private arm, to buy 80% of what they grow at triple the market rate. Now, why that's key is it stabilizes the farmer, their family, so they can actually spend the time to really learn how to farm. So they don't have to sell these weird foods that we're asking them to. So I think that's been a key piece. We're working on an open source manual because we can't train everybody. I'm now training to have a train of the trainers in every state. I'm having a fisherman or young folks learn this, and then they have to agree if I train them to train other folks. That's they don't have to pay, but they've got to be part of our network of learning.
Thanks.
And Bren, there's a final question from our audience, and it is, so can you help us visualize how your sort of farming can work at scale and be replicated at a regional level?
Yeah. So on replication, the key, like I said, was low barrier to entries. You want an architecture of design underwater that is cheap and requires minimal skills. And we've proven that can happen. We've got 26 farms coming online, many of them fully up and running. For scale, we see what I think of as green wave reefs, which are networks of 25 to 50 farms in an area, a seafood hub, and a hatchery on land. And importantly, we put our hatcheries and seafood hubs in the poorest communities. Our first one ever was in the poorest community in the East Coast. We want our reefs to be engines of food justice, really important to us. And then, so the seafood hubs, and then a ring of institutional buyers. We work with Google, we work with universities, Patagonia, all sorts of folks to buy large scale, create stability, and then a final ring of entrepreneurs doing kelp jerkies, fertilizers, beefs, biofuels. And then you take that green wave reef and you replicate it every 200 miles up and down the coast. We did ours here in New England. We've just started a new reef in California. And to me, that's how we go to scale, but not scale with having to rely on huge companies. We create relationships with them, but as farmers, as fishermen, we want to have our own jobs. We want to have agency. I think if there's one deficit we're seeing, at least in the U.S. here, is our jobs and our new jobs, you don't get a sense of meaning and you don't have a sense of agency. And so we want people out farming and participating and fighting climate change, feeding their families, and just, as I say, let's create jobs and farms you can still sing songs about.
I mean, I think that's a great point to almost finish on, but something else to just ask as well was getting the physical aspects right is just one part of it, but how important do you think is the other side of changing consumer and other farmer mindsets? Yeah,
the farmer mindset is really, what for me is fishermen. And actually, we've seen transition before. Like I lived through the collapse of the cod stocks, and we didn't do the cultural piece right. And so it turned fishermen against environmentalism. It turned them actually into the arms of the right wing in the U.S., so that we have cultural training. We recognize the loss. We say, listen, you're not going to be able to chase fish anymore. Those days are over, and we are going to miss them, and we're going to miss wild food because seafood is the last wild food. It is going to be a sad thing. But you get to own your own boat. You get to succeed and fail on your own terms. You don't have a boss, and you still get the sense of pride of helping feed the country. Those core aspects of being a fisherman, of being a farmer, we get to keep. And actually, funny enough, that cultural discussion is often the most important one that we have with fishermen.
It's really interesting. I'd love to hear if you have anything to add from your experience as well, Tim.
Yeah, I guess the enthusiasm for farming the way I'm farming is there amongst the people that are in my generation. But many of them have got a father or grandfather ahead of them, and they need to get out of the way because as soon as we can find a way for successful succession to happen in businesses, then this type of farming on the land, it will come. But that's the big barrier at the moment, is that there's a bottleneck of old people at the top there that need to kind of get out of the way a bit.
A die-off, huh? You're calling for a massive die-off.
I mean, I guess we can plan quite, timelines for that. But I think that is actually all we have time for in this session. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed it. And, thank you to Tim, to Bren, to Craig and to Karen for being such awesome guests and co-hosts. And that's all from us here. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hi, Bren.
Hey,
Thank
you
you.
get what you want? Is that go okay? Hello? Oh, can you hear me?
We
Bren.